Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series, Essays on the Gita, as always with our beloved Raga. We are on chapter 4, the core of the teaching.
The core of the teaching. We know the divine teacher, we see the human disciple. It remains to form a clear conception of the doctrine, a clear conception fastening upon the essential idea, the central heart of the teaching, is especially necessary here because the Gita, with its rich and many-sided thought, its synthetical grasp of different aspects of spiritual life, and the fluent winding motion of its argument, lends itself, even more than other scriptures, to one-sided misinterpretations born of a partisan intellectuality.
Misrepresentations.
Yeah, misrepresentation. Because it is so wide and it has so many different aspects that there is a stress on, he will explain that some people stress one aspect, some people stress other aspects. That's a misrepresentation. So, the unconscious or half-conscious wresting of fact and word and idea to suit a preconceived notion or the doctrine or principle of one's preference is recognized by Indian logicians as one of the most fruitful sources of fallacy. And it is perhaps the one which it is most difficult for even the most conscientious thinker to avoid. For the human reason is incapable of always playing the detective upon itself in this respect. It is its very nature to seize upon some partial conclusion, idea, principle, become its partisan, and make it the key to all truth. And it has an infinite faculty of doubling upon itself, so as to avoid detecting in its operations this necessary and cherished weakness. The Gita lends itself easily to this kind of error because it is easy, by throwing particular emphasis on one of its aspects or even on some salient and emphatic text, and putting all the rest of the 18 chapters into the background or making them a subordinate and auxiliary teaching, to turn it into a partisan of our own doctrine or dogma. So he is warning us that we have to understand the teaching in its fullness and we should not stress one aspect. And that's very common, and that's what happens with the human mind.
And he has already seen it in many interpretations of the Gita.
That's what he's saying. Because the nature of the mind itself is like that. The mind it doesn't see the whole. It sees only parts. And it has a tendency to stress those parts which most appeal to you. So naturally you will overstress those things. In fact, he will explain later on. Some people say the Gita is a doctrine of Karma Yoga. Others will say, no, it is Jnana Yoga. Some others again say, no, it is Bhakti Yoga. It's actually all three. It's synthetic. So it is a synthesis. He has given us in the beginning the many synthetic philosophies in India. The Vedas were one, then the Upanishads were one, then the Tantric system was one, and the Gita is one, and now his own philosophy also is synthetic. It's not exclusive. So that's what it's meaning. But it is good to look at the error, which he says is very common. So we'll have a look at that, and then we'll go on to the next para. So, we know the divine teacher. We have 3 chapters before that, our demand and need from the Gita, then the divine teacher, and then the human disciple. And now the fourth one, the teaching. So that's what he's saying. We know the divine teacher, we see the human disciple. It remains to form a clear conception of the doctrine. What is the Gita trying to tell us? A clear conception fastening upon the essential idea, the central heart of the teaching, is especially necessary here because the Gita, with its rich and many-sided thought, its synthetical grasp of different aspects of the spiritual life, and the fluent winding motion of its argument, lends itself, even more than other scriptures, to one-sided misrepresentations born of a partisan intellectuality, stressing one aspect only. Okay? The word rest is very interesting. You wrest something means you extract something with force and violence. So, wresting, the meaning is there, but you are twisting it and turning it and bringing out another meaning. Okay? Wresting of fact and word and idea to suit a preconceived notion or the doctrine or principle of one's preference. And simply saying, this is recognized by Indian logicians as one of the most fruitful sources of fallacy. You would expect fruitful to be used in a positive way, but he's saying here it produces
Yes.
an abundance of fallacies. Okay, so. And it is perhaps the one which it is most difficult for even the most conscientious thinker to avoid. It's very difficult to avoid this error. That's what I'm saying. For the human reason is incapable of always playing the detective upon itself in this respect. So, when you make a statement, you will see throughout Sri Aurobido's writings, he makes a statement and then he himself challenges his statement. He is playing the detective upon his own statement. This is something very rare. That's what Sri Aurobindo is saying.
And very often he will say, as if.
Yes, that's right. He makes a statement and then he takes up the counter, the argument against what he's saying. And then he discusses that again. So this is what he does. So it's very interesting way of putting it. He's saying, playing the detective upon itself. Okay. So, in this respect, it is its very nature, the mind's nature, the human mind, to seize upon some partial conclusion, idea, principle, become its partisan, and make it the key to all truth. And it has an infinite faculty of doubling upon itself. So, what would you mean by that? Looking at it and confirming what you are saying, doubling upon itself. Okay. So as to avoid detecting in its operations this necessary and cherished weakness. Now, this is something very interesting, because suppose I have written something or typed something, I should normally not do my own proofreading, because I am set in what I have written and I am likely to read what I think has been written. So the proofreading should be done by somebody else and not the author himself. So that is what is meant by doubling upon itself and playing the detective.
But would it be the same in poetry?
So far as diction is concerned, yes, but it's not that much in poetry, because poetry is something more purposeful. Of course, a poet can make a mistake, and then when he reads it, because he knows the source from where it is coming. Yeah, it's interesting. You are a poet yourself. Okay, so, and it has an infinite faculty of doubling upon itself so as to avoid detecting in its operations this necessary and cherished weakness. It's a weakness that people like. You stick to your own way of writing, and what you have written,
you cherish it.
Yeah, you cherish it. It's fixed in your mind. the Gita lends itself easily to this kind of error because it is easy by throwing particular emphasis on one of its aspects or even on some salient and emphatic text and putting all the rest of the 18 chapters into the background or making them a subordinate and auxiliary teaching to turn it into a partisan of our own doctrine or dogma, of our own doctrine and dogma. So you should be very careful. That's why we want to examine the core of the teaching, what it is, because it can be misinterpreted. We go to the next para. Thus, there are those who make the Gita teach not works at all, but a discipline of preparations for renouncing life and works. The indifferent performance of prescribed actions or of whatever task may lie ready to the hands becomes the means, the discipline. The final renunciation of life and works is the sole real object. I'm just telling you that this is not Sri Aurobindo speaking. He is speaking for those who are misinterpreting. There are those who make the Gita teach. And what are they teaching? This is what they are teaching. So, the final renunciation of life and works is the sole real object. It is quite easy to justify this view by citations from the book and by a certain arrangement of stress in following out its argument, especially if we shut our eyes to the peculiar way in which it uses such a word as sannyasa, renunciation. But it is quite impossible to persist in this view on an impartial reading in face of the continual assertion to the very end that action should be preferred to inaction, and that superiority lies with the true, the inner renunciation of desire by equality and the giving up of works to the Supreme Purusha. So when he uses the word sannyasa, people think giving up of physical world and physical action and body-mind life. But that's not, because there is another word, tyaga and sannyasa. He means the giving up of desire and attachment within yourself. That is what is meant by sannyasa. Okay, so he is warning that there are some people who say that it is not karma yoga at all. Whereas others say, yes, it is karma yoga. It is works. In fact, the Gita stress on the sacrifice. Whatever you are doing, you have to do it as a sacrifice for the divine. You do it not for yourself, but for the divine. So, the first warning, people are saying that it is not karma yoga, but Sridhar says it is karma yoga. Because again and again, there is that action is preferred to inaction. That's the last bit, what he's saying. It is a continual assertion to the very end that action should be preferred to inaction, and that superiority with the true, the inner renunciation of desire by equality, and the giving up of works to the Supreme Purusha. You give up the works, you do it for the Lord and not for yourself. That's what it means. So sannyasa can be misinterpreted. Sannyasa is very often confused with giving up the physical life. He is a sannyasin, we use the word. So when he says he is a sannyasin, he has nothing to do with the world. He has given up the world.
Orange robes.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's a sign that he has given up the world. Okay, so the first warning, there are people who say that it is not karma yoga, but Sridhar is saying it is karma yoga. We go to the next para. Others again speak of the Gita as if the doctrine of devotion were its whole teaching, and put in the background its monistic elements and a high place it gives to quietistic emergence in the one self of all. So there are those who say devotion is the most important, bhakti yoga. Okay, there is a second misinterpretation. And undoubtedly, Its emphasis on devotion, its insistence on the aspect of the divine as Lord and Purusha, and its doctrine of the Purushottama, the Supreme Being who is superior both to the mutable being and to the immutable, and who is what in his relation to the world we know as God, are the most striking and among the most vital elements of the Gita. Still, this Lord is a self in whom all knowledge culminates, and the master of sacrifice to whom all works lead, as well as the Lord of love, into whose being the heart of devotion enters, and the Gita preserves a perfectly equal balance, emphasizing now knowledge, now works, now devotion, but for the purposes of the immediate trend of the thought, not with any absolute separate preference over one over the others. He in whom all three meet and become one, he is the Supreme Being, the Purushottama. So this second misinterpretation, it is Bhakti Yoga alone, most important. So again, Srimad warning, no, it's not like that. It's a combination of knowledge, Jnana Yoga, combination of devotion, Bhakti Yoga, and also Karma Yoga. And sometimes it lays stress on one, and if you take those shlokas, then you are not taking into account the others, because there is a stress when he is discussing devotion. It seems to be the ultimate. When he is discussing knowledge, it seems to be the most important.
But he says it keeps a perfectly equal balance.
That's right. If you read all the 18 chapters, you will see that he is stressing all equally. Okay. It's interesting. But when mother is dealing with everybody, okay, she deals so beautifully with each one that each one thinks that mother is very special to me, not so much to the others. There is an overstress in that. But she is equal to everybody. So here also, the Gita is equal to all the three, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga.
And Sri Aurobindo says those closest to her are not
necessarily physically close.
Yes, exactly.
In fact, some of the most striking people they were not necessarily in touch with her. I'll tell you a very interesting, because you raised that question. There was a gentleman here called Khirod, okay, and Srimad described him as a perfect karma yogin. He used to look after the building service, Khirodda. His nephews and all that are still here, okay, Anup and Bhavin and that family. So, what he used to do, he used to work, and mother used to give blessings at that time from 11 to 11:30 or 12 o'clock or something like that. So he used to come for the blessings, but people used to see that correctly at 12 he walks out without going to mother. He did that several times, and some people got puzzled. He is coming and not going to mother. Why is he avoiding? Is he avoiding mother? So they inquired of him, and he said, it is 12 o'clock is mother's lunch time, and I don't want her to be late for her lunch. So that is the reason why I go away.
How beautiful, huh?
So, and Srimdo, someone in the evening talks, they spoke about Khirod and said, he's a very fine man, isn't it? And Srimdo says, a fine man? He is a Karma Yogin. He is a perfect Karma Yogin. So, we don't understand, and everyone thinks that those who are physically close to mother, they are the special ones. But it's not like that at all. Another case was there, very striking case, and he reached a very high standard of spiritual life. Gangadharan. Gangadharan was a local Tamilian, and he was not even well educated. At a very young age, he came to the ashram and was admitted. And his work was the humblest of all. He used to supervise the sanitary cleaners, those who were cleaners of toilets and all that. That was his work. But what heights of experiences he had. And one day he was ill and he was just lying in his bed. Mother sent someone immediately and said, go and see Gangadharan. He is not well. You have to look after him. And nobody had told her. But the inner contact is so strong that she knew immediately that he needs attention. And he was hardly ever openly in touch with mother. So, what you said is absolutely right. So, the next one. So, first says the misinterpretation, it is not Karma Yoga. Second misinterpretation, it is only Bhakti Yoga. Okay? But it is not so. Then, I think we'll go through each sentence here because there is the Purushottama, the concept of the Purushottama, we should have a clear idea of what the Purushottama is in the Gita. So I am reading this para again. Others again speak of the Gita as if the doctrine of devotion were its whole teaching and put in the background its monistic elements and the high place it gives to quietistic emergence in the one self of all. The monistic emergence and the one self of all is obviously the experience of the self. So, you make your mind silent, it is the path of Jnana Yoga. So, they say it is Bhakti Yoga and not so much Jnana Yoga. That's a misinterpretation. And undoubtedly, its emphasis on devotion, its insistence on the aspect of the divine as Lord and Purusha, and its doctrine of the Purushottama, the supreme being who is superior both to the mutable being and to the immutable, and who is what in his relation to the world we know as God, are the most striking and among the most vital elements of the Gita. So, there are three levels that the Gita speaks about, and Srimad also speaks about the three levels. Level 1, the psychic being, which is the mutable divine element in you. The psychic being is growing. It is not static, it is growing. And it is in you. It comes down into the manifestation. It comes down into the physical world.
Into each person?
Yes, into each person. But it is hidden in the beginning, and slowly through many lives, it grows. It is not only person. The divine presence is there in everybody, and that's a soul. The divine presence in a amorphous state. It is not developed, but the potential is there. That's the soul. But when the soul through many lives grows conscious of itself, it starts becoming the psychic being. The soul is the child divinity in you, and the psychic is the child who is awakened. So this is and the self is that which is static and does not evolve.
Eternal.
Eternal, infinite, static. It does not evolve at all. It is standing above you and supporting you.
So we have the soul, we have the self, and the psychic being.
Yeah, but upwards. The soul is the lowest, the psychic being is the developed soul, and then you have the self which is above that, and the self does not evolve and does not come down into body-mind life. It remains above, supports you. But the psychic being evolves through many lives. So, you have the Kshara Purusha, the mutable self, and you have the Akshara Purusha, which is the immutable self. And in the Kshara Purusha, you can experience the divine as a person. Best example, Ramakrishna. He didn't have the knowledge of this self. He was made to have that experience later on. Then the Akshara Purusha, the Nirvana experience of the self or the Brahmic consciousness. But there it is impersonality. You don't see any person there. You don't see any God with form. You see the impersonal. It's a state of knowledge. It's a state of peace. It's a state of release, freedom, infinity, equality, complete peace, and not touched by anything. But that's the impersonal aspect. The Purushottama is the third aspect where it combines both. And the devotional path finally has to go to the Purushottama. So that's what he's saying. The Gita gives these three: the mutable, the immutable, and the combination of two, which is the Purushottama. So, Kshara Purusha, Akshara Purusha, Uttama Purusha. Then you reverse Uttama Purusha, it becomes Purushottama. So this is one of the main ideas in the Gita. It's very important, these three levels. That's why we went into it. Okay, so the mutable being and the immutable, and what is in his relation to the world we call God. And when we speak of God, it's usually the personal aspect of the divine. The impersonal aspect of the divine, you don't use the word God. You use the word Brahman. Or in West, they would use the word spirit. It's an impersonal aspect of the divine. Okay? In fact, the idea is there even in Christianity. The God the Father, the Holy Ghost, and the Son.
Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Ghost. Yeah. The Holy Spirit is the transcendent. And the Father is the cosmic, and the Son is the individual. So, still, this Lord is the Self, in whom all knowledge culminates, and the Master of sacrifice, to whom all works lead, as well as the Lord of love, into whose being the heart of devotion enters, and the Gita preserves a perfectly equal balance, emphasizing now knowledge, now works, now devotion, but for the purposes of the immediate trend of the thought, not with any absolute separate preference of one over the others. He in whom all three meet and become one, he is the Supreme Being, the Purushottama. So, the mutable being, the immutable being, and the Purushottama. And that's the Lord. So, ultimately, all these three have to understand the last level, the Purushottama. Okay. The first error, misrepresentation, the renunciation of works is the only truth. Then, the second misinterpretation, devotion is overstressed. But Sri is saying, no, it is not overstressed, it is equal. Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga. Knowledge, devotion, and works. So, now the third error. Okay. But at the present day, since in fact the modern mind began to recognize and deal at all with the Gita, the tendency is to subordinate its elements of knowledge and devotion to take advantage of its continual insistence on action and to find in it a scripture of the Karma Yoga, a light leading us on the path of action, a gospel of works. Undoubtedly, the Gita is a gospel of works, but of works which culminate in knowledge, that is, in spiritual realization and quietude, and of works motived by devotion, that is, a conscious surrender of one's whole self, first into the hands and then into the being of the Supreme, and not at all of works as they are understood by the modern mind. Not at all an action dictated by egoistic and altruistic, by personal, social, humanitarian motives, principles, ideals. Yet, this is what present day interpretations seek to make of the Gita. We are told continually by many authoritative voices that the Gita, opposing in this the ordinary ascetic and quietistic tendency of Indian thought and spirituality, proclaims with no uncertain sound the gospel of human action, the ideal of disinterested performance of social duties, nay, even it would seem the quite modern ideal of social service. To all this, I can only reply that very patently and even on the very surface of it, the Gita does nothing of the kind, and that this is a modern misreading, a reading of the modern mind into an ancient book of the present day European or Europeanized intellect into a thoroughly antique, a thoroughly oriental and Indian teaching. That which the Gita teaches is not a human, but a divine action. Not the performance of social duties, but the abandonment of all other standards of duty or conduct as a selfless performance of the divine will working through our nature. Not social service, but the action of the best, the God possessed, the masterman, done impersonally for the sake of the world and as a sacrifice to Him who stands behind man and nature. So, this is the third mistake that people make. It is all karma yoga, and karma yoga is not social work, but they stress that aspect because it's very strong in Christianity. Social service, selfless service, altruism, philanthropy, humanitarianism.
Caring for the poor.
Yes, that's right.
But here we see that rare I. To all this, I can only
Yes.
reply, yes.
I can only say that the Gita does nothing of the kind. You are misinterpreting the Gita. So, don't misinterpret the Gita to say that it's only Jnana Yoga. Don't misinterpret it as only Bhakti Yoga, and don't misinterpret it as only social duty, Karma Yoga. Even Karma Yoga does not stress the social duties. Do all works as a sacrifice to the divine. That is the Karma Yoga path.
Well, Sri Aurobindo is very strong here.
Yeah.
Against those who would
That's right.
profess otherwise.
Yeah. Because the Gita, he has told us already, is a synthetic work. It combines equal stress on knowledge, equal stress on devotion to the Lord, and equal stress on works. That's what. Mastermen. It is not social work. It is work of mastermen and God-possessed men. The action of the best, the God-possessed and mastermen, done impersonally for the sake of the world and as a sacrifice to Him who stands behind man and nature. So, it is the spiritual work that is being stressed, not social work. Social work in itself is not bad, but that's not spiritual life. Because all social work, humanitarianism, philanthropy, social service, is all normally ego-oriented.
Even Mother Teresa.
Yes, but we don't know about her because it's possible to do social service without an ego. It's possible. But it's not necessary that you do that. You need not do social service and you can be doing it for the divine. But of course I can do social service without an ego. It's possible.
I believe that Mother and Sri Aurobindo speak about philanthropy usually
in a negative way.
As an egoistic thing.
It's usually like that.
Uh-huh.
It's usually like that. In other words, the Gita is not a book of practical ethics, but of the spiritual life. There is a big difference between practical ethics, morality, and spiritual life. The modern mind is just now the European mind, such as it has become after having abandoned not only the philosophic idealism of the highest Greco-Roman culture from which it started, but the Christian devotionalism of the Middle Ages. These it has replaced by or transmuted into a practical idealism and social, patriotic, and philanthropic devotion. It has got rid of God or kept him only for Sunday use and erected in his place man as its deity and society as its visible idol. At its best, it is practical, ethical, social, pragmatic, altruistic, humanitarian. European thought he is talking about. Now all these things are good, are especially needed at the present day, are part of the divine will, or they would not have become so dominant in humanity. Nor is there any reason why the divine man, the man who lives in the Brahmic consciousness, in the God being, should not be all of these things in his action. So there he's saying very clearly, you can do social work, even if you are in the spiritual consciousness. He will be, if they are the best ideal of the age, the Yuga Dharma, and there is no yet higher ideal to be established, no great radical change to be effected, then naturally you have to do that. For he is, as the teacher points out to his disciple, the best who has to set the standard for others. And in fact, Arjuna is called upon to live according to the highest ideals of his age and the prevailing culture, but with knowledge, with understanding of that which lay behind, and not as ordinary men, with a following of the merely outward law and rule. So Srimda is not criticizing the social work. He says if there is no better standard, of course social work should be done. But if there is a better standard, then you take the better standard. So, and he's saying all this is very good. Okay? But it is not spiritual action. When spiritual action is there, naturally that is the superior action.
Not a book of practical ethics.
Yes.
But of the spiritual life.
Yes.
Huge difference.
Ethics and morality is more or less the same thing. The idealism of morality and ethics is from the mind, not from the spirit. The spirit is something wider. You do it not for humanity or for human people or human beings, but for the divine. You can help human beings, but it is being done for the divine and not for the human beings.
And where does the phrase doing it not for the fruits of action?
Yeah, that's right. When philanthropy, you are doing it for the fruits of the action. That means you take delight in what you are doing. I am doing great work. Okay? And it's a very subtle thing. Okay? So, it's very interesting. We can just stress that once. Suppose I am feeding 100 people on my birthday or on a special day. I feed 100 people. I'm doing good work. They were hungry and I fed them. But that doesn't solve their problem. No? Next day they're hungry again. So you have to find a solution. The spiritual man will try to find a solution which will permanently solve the problem of poverty and hunger. Philanthropy doesn't do that. It's only a palliative. It's just temporarily you are relieving suffering further. That's no solution at all spiritually. There is a very interesting phrase which says, if you give fish to a man, you
feed him for
satisfy
a day.
his hunger for the day.
Yeah.
But if you teach him how to fish, you have solved his problem. So that's exactly what has to be done. So here also, if you go to a higher level and see what is the cause of suffering, what is the cause of evil, you are doing a much, much greater work. So charity is not something bad. It is okay at a certain level, but there are better standards and better things to do. That's what he wants. So he's talking about the modern mind and the Christian compassion and also the Buddhistic compassion. These are all they do social works. Wherever there is an epidemic or there is a flood, they go and do the social work. It's not to be criticized, it's good, but it's not spiritual work. That's what he's saying. In other words, the Gita is not a book of practical ethics, but of spiritual life. The difference is, spiritual life is not by man-made rules. It is not made by the mind. Morality is by the mind. This is good, this is not good. This is evil, this is falsehood. This is all from the mind. But in the spiritual world, that which you consider bad may not necessarily be bad. No, we make a distinction between sin and virtue. We make a distinction between truth and falsehood. Okay? It's possible to tell a lie with a good intention. It's possible to tell the truth with a bad intention. I'll give you a very easy example. I have a friend, okay, who has done something he shouldn't have done. Okay, to protect him, okay, I might tell a lie that he has not done it. Or if I have an enemy, okay, and I know that he has done something bad, and someone comes and inquires, do you know what he has done? I tell the truth, but my intention is to hurt him. So I'm telling the truth with a bad intention. That's a spiritual action. So I can tell a lie also to protect someone. Suppose someone is rushing into your room and says, there's someone chasing me with a knife, please hide me. Okay? Very often I give this example. And you hide him somewhere. Then that murderer comes with his knife. Okay? Where is that fellow? Are you going to tell him the truth? You're not going to tell him the truth. So, truth and falsehood, and this is not, it's a morality. So, even that which is killing, for instance, okay?
Well, that's what Arjuna has to do.
Exactly, that's a problem. So, we always say that killing is bad. Not necessarily. So, morality is not spiritual life. It is quite different. Morality is mind-made rules and regulations. But spiritual life is made by the spirit above, the self. That's the difference. So, Gita is not a book of practical ethics, but of spiritual life. The modern mind is just now the European mind, because European culture has spread all over the world and it is dictating terms. In the last century, it was certainly like that. Okay, so the modern mind is just now the European mind, such as it has become after having abandoned not only the philosophical idealism of the highest Greco-Roman culture from which it started, but the Christian devotionalism of the Middle Ages. So that devotionalism also has been abandoned in the modern times, and you have decided only on social service as the real, as the ultimate truth. These it has replaced by or transmuted into a practical idealism and social, patriotic and philanthropic devotion. It has got rid of God or kept him only for Sunday use and erected in his place man as his deity and society as his visible idol. Help your neighbor, help the poor man. This is the noblest thing that you could do. That's humanitarianism. God doesn't come into the picture at all. Of course, it's a noble thing, but it's not a spiritual life. That's what Swami is stressing. So, and by the way, the Sunday use, he is not aiming only at Christianity. He has used the word Sunday use, but that exists in all religions. In Hinduism also, on Fridays you go to the temple, and on New Year Day or on Ganesh Chaturthi, Ganesh Chaturthi day, the line went right up to handmade paper, 1 mile. The queue was so long. So it is to be done every day, every moment of your life. You have to think of the divine, not visit temple only. Even in Islam, you have that. Fridays, you go to the mosque. So Sunday you must not misinterpret that Sri Aurobindo is aiming only at Christianity. No, all religion is like that. Okay, so at its best, European thought, at its best, it is practical, ethical, social, pragmatic, altruistic. You can pronounce it altruistic or altruistic, both. Humanitarianism. Now, all these things are good, are especially needed at the present day. Why? Because in the present day, selfishness has become too much. Everybody wants to do things only for himself. So if you are doing social work, very good. That's what he's saying. Are part of the divine will, or they would not have become so dominant in humanity. Certainly the divine wants to help everybody. Okay? Nor is there any reason why the divine man, the man who lives in the Brahmic consciousness, in the God being, should not be all these things in his action. He can do. He will be, if they are the best ideal of the age. If that's the best morality is the best ideal of the age, he will certainly do that. The Yuga Dharma, the Dharma which is applicable to that particular Yuga. Yuga is a age, a particular age. So if that is the highest, certainly he can do it. And there is no yet higher ideal to be established. Then it's okay. But if there is a higher ideal to be established, then it is better to migrate to the higher one and not the lower one. No great radical change to be effected. For he is, as the teacher points out to his disciple, the best who has to set the standard for others. In fact, Arjuna is called upon to live according to the highest ideals of his age and the prevailing culture, but with knowledge, with understanding of that which lay behind, and not as ordinary men, with a following of the merely outward law and rule. In fact, in the Gita, the teacher, Krishna, is telling Arjuna that you are a Kshatriya. You have to maintain the dharma of the Kshatriya. It's a limited dharma, but you have to do that. You need not give up that action. But the point here is that the modern mind has exiled from its practical motive power the two essential things: God, or the eternal, and spirituality, or the God state, which are the master conceptions of the Gita. It lives in humanity only, and the Gita would have us live in God. Modern mind wants to pay attention to humanity, whereas spirituality is saying, no, think of God, do everything for God. Now this is the construction instead of those, so I'll read it with the understanding. So, the modern mind would have us live in the mutable being who is all creatures, and the Gita would have us live also in the immutable and the supreme. The modern mind would have us live in the changing march of time, and the Gita would have us live in the eternal. Or if these higher things are now beginning to be vaguely envisaged, it is only to make them subservient to man and society. But God and spirituality exist in their own right and not as adjuncts. And in practice, the lower in us must learn to exist for the higher, in order that the higher also may in us consciously exist for the lower, to draw it nearer to its own altitudes. If there is a choice between social service and spirituality. If spirituality is not there and social service is the highest at that particular time in evolution, fine, you do it. But if there is a spiritual life which is superior, that is superior and that's what should be done. That's what it is. He is not denying this social service. He is not finding fault with social service. But there is a better standard.
Good.
We stop here
Thank
today.
you. Namaste.